Well, before we pick up on some of the themes we've been exploring, we were just talking about ways of getting into space, and Barry was bringing up space elevators. And like you put a satellite out at some like stable orbit, and then you drop a cable down, and you can have machines crawl up and down the cable, like carrying the cargo, so you don't have
elevators.
Yeah, little elevators. And I was wondering if artificial spider silk could be strong enough to do the job, and if through some sort of as a wild thought, like what if you actually just like designed the elevators to actually have a lot of the affordance properties of spiders, including even like inspecting and laying down new silk at places where like you need to shore up the cable. That would be creepy and awesome. So
and very economical, because it wouldn't have to overcome gravity to, I mean, you wouldn't need fuel, a lot of fuel to overcome gravity. It would be you could use an electric motor to climb the cable, and then if you launched, if there was a station there where you could launch the plane from there, then you would save a tremendous amount of fuel in overcoming the gravity to get the plane up there. And if they could just launch from space and then go intercontinental, they would go much faster because of the lack of air resistance, and it would be much more economical because it would just be the acceleration, the lateral acceleration mainly, without having to overcome gravity all the time. So it could be much faster than current jet travel, much higher up without above the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, and much faster and much cheaper. So it could really revolutionize travel. You get to Europe in a couple of hours, or to Australia in just a few hours. So it's really it could be the idea of having this this stable satellite with a cable from Earth, platform on Earth to up to the satellite, and used as an elevator cable, would be really a fantastic idea.
I'm not sure if artificial spider silk is up to the job, but in terms of me getting fixated on spiders, Barry then brought up that they lay down two kinds of silk.
Right.
One is a sticky silk that they use for catching prey, and another is a less sticky silk that they use for
non-sticky at all.
Non-sticky. And I was
They
wondering, I was wondering, how do they know which is which? Is it that there's like a reflex arc that like somehow gives them a sign, or do they? And then Mary's like, well, maybe they have actually memories of where they lay down which one, and not mutually exclusive, but that would be like either one would be interesting. And so then
it could also be that they sense the chemical difference between the sticky and the non-sticky. They walk along. They use the non-sticky silk as their path to get to the predators. So they don't walk. They themselves don't walk on the sticky part. So maybe there's sensors in their feet that we were talking. Do they have memory of which cable they lay down, and or do they have some kind of, you say, a reflex, or do they have some kind of can they tell the difference chemically? Do they have sensors in their feet that tell the chemical difference between the sticky type and the non-sticky type, and then they use that information? But I never underestimate the intelligence of insects. There's this famous case that Tinbergen studied of the digger wasp, that is a little wasp just a few centimeters long, that lays its about a dozen eggs around the perimeter of a large lake, and on the shore. So it digs a hole and lays an egg, and then goes on to another region and digs another hole, lays another egg, and all around the perimeter of the lake. And then every day it comes back to each hole and feeds the developing larvae. And the question that he asked is, how do they know where this little burrow is, these 12 different burrows around the perimeter of the lake? How do they know? How do they remember it? So what he did was a very simple experiment of, he rearranged the pebbles that were around the burrows, and then the wasps could not find the burrows. So that was evidence that they learn the configuration of the land around each of their 12 burrows, and they come back to it every day. That's a wasp with a countable number of neurons. Talk about memory.
I wonder if that's so the form the memory takes, like, is it a series of, let's say, like trajectories, like something maybe like scaffolded, like by, like, what's it called, the mushroom bodies, or is it potentially like something with like the central complex, like, which seems almost like quasi hippocampal, like actually having something more map like in terms, or like having like a graph that can be navigated, because like there's like, it gives like a spatial salience. It's almost like, it seems like a hybrid of like was it the tectum for like orienting, and or the colliculus and the campus. So like, is it actually in that little architecture? Is it, or is it both? So it's like, how many ways is this over-engineered? How degenerate is it?
I don't know. I mean, that would be a wonderful study, because with such a few number of neurons, I mean, any of the symptoms, you take the simplest part of the mammalian brain, a tectum, or the the so-called simpler brainstem, and if they're doing it that way, it still has many orders of magnitude more neurons than the neurons in the wasp. So whatever it's doing, I mean, can you imagine if you can do that kind of spatial recognition and memory with the limit, the countable number of neurons in a wasp brain? Imagine what a computer could do using that same kind of circuitry.
Is the digger wasp the one that has like only like a few thousand? And it's like, because like bees, I think it's like a couple 100,000, but digger
Well,
wasp,
I don't know.
I know
I don't
there's some
know.
series of wasps or hornet or something where it's like
They only
really
have
small.
the really small number. I know. Yeah.
But I guess what I'm wondering is, it's like, in terms of like species to study, in terms of like maximal purchase, like when we go to C. elegans, I'm wondering if it's like, you see some of the same principles there with, like, because they have even fewer, but potentially there's even like more like genetic complexity, and it's less general purpose in terms of like chaining together the oscillators just so. But like when you get to insects, they seem to have these like analogs, maybe even slightly homologs of the core vertebrate structures, but really micro-sized. So like, to what extent can we get purchase and understanding like the ways like brainstem and or thalamus or hippocampal systems like function by studying these like much simpler systems you're talking about with like countable neurons, and maybe like, so like if there's some wasp species, like every vertebrate has the full architecture in a sense, even though it's a little bit different. And so like you can go to like the minimal vertebrate,
The
and
basic brain. The
yeah,
basic brain.
and so like, would something like when these wasps be like the most basic of all basic brains that
No,
shows?
I think the whole design is different, because it's much more distributed.
Damn.
No, well, different. I mean, it's distributed in the sense of they have computation in different parts of the body. It's not all in one place. The computation in the mammalian brain, or in the vertebrate brain, I should say, the vertebrate brain, it's all concentrated in one place in the brain. in the brain is a single entity with connections, you know, sensory and motor connections, the nerves in and out of the brain, but it's one brain. But in the invertebrates, there are the computation. So in other words, in the vertebrates, the computation is all done in one place, different parts of the brain, but it's all done in a brain. Whereas in the invertebrates, the computations are done in various parts of the body, and there are cross connections between the different computational centers.
Are they called ganglion in invertebrates?
Well, they call ganglia, but they're really
Ganglia.
yeah, they're called ganglia, but because a ganglion is a cluster of neurons, so it's really, yeah, you could say it's ganglia, but this more than ganglia, because ganglia, like in the autonomic system in the vertebrates, though they don't really do computation, they're really transmission centers. The sympathetic chain ganglia, the superior cervical ganglion, you know, the mesenteric ganglia, they really just transmit. But in the invertebrates, they really do different kinds of computation. And like in the octopus, there's some, you know, in the eye, and then in limbs, things like that. So the computational centers are distributed in the local parts of the body that do different functions.
So more
it's a very
sophisticated, less integrated peripheral processing is happening closer to the.
It was closer to the point, the required, whatever's required has local computation, or, you know, different body parts doing different functions have their computational centers right near where they're doing it.
Like
so
each of the segments,
different,
for instance, would be locally doing like the adjustments.
So it's a different layout. It's a different concept of control systems.
How, at what point within this hierarchy, going from like the vertebrate to ganglia to like working our way into cortex, at what point do we start to get sophisticated computation, would you say, where it's like you would call it like meaningfully to say it computes?
Well, I would say that in the case of the wasp, that is definitely computation, because how can it remember the orientation of pebbles around each of a dozen different burrows where each of its larvae is? I mean, it's recognizing, because when he changed the configuration of the pebbles around a burrow, the wasp got lost. They couldn't identify, they couldn't find the burrow. So they obviously have a map of the surrounding environment.
Is it a map though, or a cue triggered routing, like where it's like there's like the sensory impression, and then this triggers like different like patterns of like left, right, left, given the impressions? Like, is there actually though, in some, because like we get spatial character, like organismic, egocentric, like spatial character when we get to the central complex, but is that somehow hosting a map, or is there some sort of logic built in to like it's not dopamine, it's like, or is it dopamine? It's like octopamine, I forget, but whatever the mushroom bodies are being sculpted by, like kind of basal ganglia, like is it a series of like left, right, lefts that if occasioned by the right stimulus combinations can function as a map, but it's actually a series of routes?
A series of what?
Routes. It's like, or a series of like, if you're here, go here, or here, go there, but there's no like place where there's like a map that could be exact. To the degree there's flexibility, it's because it's just multiple views and multiple ways of seeking in, or is there actually like a data structure?
Well, I mean, there has to be a data structure, because how does it know? How does it? It has a different. How does it know which map to use if it has a dozen different maps? Okay, let's say you creates a map when it digs the burrow, it creates a map of the surrounding environment. Of course, how does it know the difference between pebbles and other things. So it has a map of like a photograph of its burrow, and then it goes on to the next burrow and it has a different photograph. So how does it know which photograph to use when? So it's still a highly complex function, and there's got to be memory involved.
I still
It's
don't
not
know.
just a little robot. If you could make a robot like that, that would be really impressive. But I don't think it's possible to create a robot with so few elements as the number of neurons in a. I mean, maybe we could learn from, maybe computer science can learn from the damn wasp.
Some sort of combination of recurrent and like a current reservoir and like a lot of morphological computation.
Yeah,
Like,
and then the selection. There's got to be the selection of which one to follow.
when it comes to vertebrates, though, I'm wondering, but like you were saying that what would be like these peripheral densities of neurons, you're saying are doing more almost routing or just like getting you the signal rather than doing like more of a sophisticated logic. So you're saying it's more distributed, the computation and things like insects, but in vertebrates it becomes more centralized.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm wondering is at what point do we get more sophisticated invertebrates computation as you move from like the peripheral ganglia to the central structure? So like Demacia, for instance,
maybe it's a question of the speed of conduction. Maybe it's more efficient to have related functions physically close to each other, because the physical proximity, because it takes time for action potential to travel along neurons. It takes time. So, and in the vertebrate brain, related functions are physically close to each other. There's the idea of the auditory cortex is close to Broca's area, which is where speech is controlled, and it's close to Wernicke's area, which is where interpretation of spoken words is interpreted, and it's close also to the motor control of the mouth. So they're all located basically adjacent to each other, and in the brain. So that could.
Is it because because we're establishing a hierarchy? Would you say?
It's a hierarchy, but the
like a hierarchy of perception and a hierarchy of like action control. Like
it's
like a hierarchical
it's a sequential process. A sequential process of the input, the computation, and the output. And when it's something like speech, it's all they're physically close to each other, and what that facilitates is the speed of conduction between the different systems. Literally, speed of conduct. I mean, the speed of conduction, or not the speed of conduction, but the latency of the conduction. In other words, by being close to each other, the different parts can communicate with each other with shorter latency, rather than having to go from the front to the back.
And greater economy.
It's greater economy. It's a greater economy,
faster and more efficient.
Faster and more efficient. There's a really beautiful study by Howard Poisner, who used to be at Rutgers, and then he got pirated away to San Diego, Scripps Institute. But he did this beautiful study talking about the function of Broca's area, because there's Wernicke's area is supposed to be the interpretation, Broca's area is supposed to be production of speech, and that's next to the auditory cortex for the sensory input, and next to the mouth for the production of speech. So, but what is the function? What is Broca's area really doing? So what he did, he looked at people who had a stroke of Broca's area, but not only was he studying the stroke, but he was studying people who were deaf from birth, who had stroke. So it was a limited sample. He had to do a lot of searching to find these people. So it was people who were deaf from birth and who had a stroke when they were adults. And the reason for doing that was because they were deaf from birth, they used sign language. They used sign language, not verbal speech. And then when they had a stroke in Broca's area that damaged Broca's area, the question was, what would happen to their sign language? What would happen to their signing? Because it's not related to the mouth. It's not related to literal speech production. And what he found, what do you think he found?
And I mean, in the past, my first impulse would have been that, like, if you thought of Broca's area as something like pre-motor cortex, or rather supplementary motor area or something for the vocal apparatus, I would have expected that because of maybe like a hardwired, not hardwired, but at least reliably assembled like location of function because of where the body plan comes into the brain, that basically that area would have still been dedicated to the mouth more than the hand. And so I would have expected it to be preserved potentially, like that some other part of cortex would have taken on the Broca's area rather than like what normally we use. It would have been closer to where the hand first inputs. So I would expect it maybe to be preserved. And I suspect I'm wrong.
You are wrong.
Ah,
Hypothesis. Well, that's hypothesis testing. It's very instructive. Yeah, because what it means is that Broca's area, even though it's connected to the mouth area, even though it's right there, nevertheless, it's not, Broca's area is really producing, it's really generating the speech. It's the concept. It's involved in the concept or the concept and production of the expression of speech. So it's not the motor. It's not motor. It's integrate. It's computational, creating the output of speech, and it's screwed up their ability to sign.
So I want to try to make as many things sensory motor as I can, but this might be I don't know, special pleading or trying to do too much. But so like, what would like the adaptations look like? I'm wondering if there's a sense that would make this a general semantic production or slash like basically a source of grammar, like a source of like thinking of all motor skill in terms of grammar, in terms of having like a kind of like nested hierarchical structure with a syntax, so things happen in the right order. And that if maybe like something like Hox genes reliably established around that area, maybe a kind of like connectivity with the striatum, maybe within the area, like a right type of like fine tuning of the layers and cell types, it just makes it really good for the kind of sequencing. I'm wondering if we could still think of it kind of motorically, but it's at such like a high level and it's so well connected that regardless of the modality, it will still take on this like semantic production grammar property, still though as a kind of very high level motor skill. I don't know if that will work, but I've been wondering like how much of like language.
Well, it's probably it creates the it synthesizes the auditory input and the meanings into a language formulation, like a grammar. It creates a grammar which has an output, and it can have an output to it has the idea of creating words, the concept of words, is what apparently the Broca's area is doing. It's creating the concept of words, and it has a motor output, and the motor output could go to various places. It can go to in other words, in people who are deaf from birth, who don't speak, but they use sign language, they are creating a grammar. So Broca's area is creating a grammar, and the grammar output is kind of a like you're saying, kind of a premotor output, but it's a formula. The Broca's area is creating a language formula that can then go out to the motor system controlling the mouth, or it can go to the hands controlling the fingers, which is sign language. That's normal. So because it's integrating the understanding of integrating the auditory input with the understanding or the interpretation of the auditory input, language. I mean, Wernicke's area is probably doing, involved in translation. So it brings in the sound, interprets the sound, goes to Broca's area. Broca's area produces the words, a formula for words. And then that formula can be transmitted to the mouth system, or to the hand system for speech, or for sign language. So it's the Broca's area is creating the language formula, the words. It's creating words.
In this way, it's neither perceptual nor sensory neatly. It's like,
that's right. It's something, it's beyond, it's integrated.
So high up, it's so integrative that it's like action perception cycles.
It's neither sensory nor motor.
It's both.
It's a
and then some. It's both plus.
It's a creation of a formula, and the formula can be expressed with different motor outputs. So we could probably, let's say people who were born without arms, who are deaf and born without arms, they might be able to speak with their toes. They might be able to use sign language, or control a computer with their toes, which they can do. I mean, there are cases, I don't know about deaf, but people, so people who don't have arms can use their toes to control a computer, a laptop. I've seen that. So, it's the concept, the conceptualization, and then the conversion into a code, a motor type code, a motor code. That's what Broca's area is doing.
Type of sophistication that it could support something like syntax and grammar, regardless of how it's expressed.
That's right.
And so it's
the expression is variable
sequences, but it's high up enough. It's true, it happens to be close to the mouth bits for the economy, but it's really the optimization. It's not just that, but the optimization for language will happen regardless, and that it will be some sort of local tuning and striatal, like tuning of like the connection to like the striatum, gets it so that it could do like hierarchical structuring of sequences, so that it can do, and it can, but also though, you're saying something else. You're saying it's also though, and the question is, I wonder how much it does this on its own, and how much it's dependent on Wernicke's area for this, in terms of basically, and thereby linking it to meanings. And so I'm wondering, so Wernicke's area, so it's like there's the meaning of the inaction, maybe in Broca's area, that's flexible and multimodal, but then the meaning on the perception cycle, where by the time we're this high, they're both completely confused, entangled, entwined.
Entangled,
But I'm wondering, so Wernicke's area, to what extent are we getting to a level of abstraction that we would call meaning, and what do we mean by meaning?
Well, I mean, meaning has to involve memory, because you have input coming in, and what is this pattern has to be related to something previously, because by matching the pattern of input with a previous pattern, then that uh, summates and produces an output. And you know, the idea of match, if you have something, when whatever comes in, a pattern that comes in, will activate a it will activate a group of neurons that are already um, more sensitive to that pattern, whichever, you know, look,
Could we say
it's
resonance?
really, let me try to explain this, because I understand something here, and it's really a very basic idea. I think that you have that a pattern comes in, let's say a word, a pattern comes in, pattern of neural activity. It activates a certain group of neurons in the auditory cortex. It has different frequencies, that has different intervals between the different syllables, things like that. It's a pattern that activates a certain group of neurons in the auditory cortex. Now, the auditory cortex has output. Now, the output, when the output goes to throughout the brain, there is, at some place in the brain, there is already a in the memory system, because it has to be a memory system. The memory system, I think the memory system can be understood as differential lower threshold places. That, you know, if you have an input that keeps coming in repeatedly, it lowers the threshold of that pathway. That persists. I mean, that's what memory is. It's a persistent lowering of a particular threshold in a particular group of neurons. So a particular group, a particular constellation of neurons has through memory, has a persistent lowered threshold. And it's incredibly complex, but you can imagine it like being a total matrix, a three-dimensional matrix, and with millions of billions of pathways connecting them. And somewhere in that matrix, when you have an input come in, somewhere in that matrix is a region of, I mean, everywhere in the matrix, there are lower threshold connections everywhere. But, and it's, you know, essentially uniform. But if you have an input that flows in, that pattern is going to activate an existing, wherever it is, where there's some pattern of lower threshold that is going to be activated by that incoming pattern. And when that happens, the summation is going to give a particular output. And that particular output is what is salient in the brain at that instant. So that is how I think that is what meaning is, because that input has activated a particular existing low threshold system, and the combination produces a unique output at that instant. And that unique output is what would say go to Broca's area. So it's the combination, it's the summation between some particular unique pattern of input, a word which is a unique pattern of input that activate that summates with with a low threshold system, wherever that is, and it could be in distributed through the matrix, and it's the memory matrix, and that will, by basic neurophysiology, that will summate with that low threshold system and activate it still more, and that will give an output, a patterned output, which will be the same as the memory. And that, I think, is the recognition or the understanding or the meaning of that input.
So the meaning is
the meaning is related to the memory.
Is the particular resonance established with response to a particular situation, and the stimuli and state you're likely to be in will then cause, for a given set of so for a given state or a given set of inputs and what you're doing, this will invoke a given set distributed basically ensembles of neurons that can activate better, where their thresholds, because they're the flow paths are established, the vibrations are set up.
The flow path. Those are nice ideas. The flow path. I mean, yeah. What do you call? What did you call it? An assembly of
ensemble.
Ensemble. Okay, I like the idea. Those are good words. The ensemble of the low threshold connection. The low threshold ensemble will match will be activated by that particular pattern, because it's an existing low threshold ensemble, and that when that happens, it gives us, it's a summated input. It makes it strengthens the output. It creates a particular flow. What that was the other,
a particular set of flow paths or
flow path,
or invokes like abstract vibration.
It triggers a particular flow path. So that is how the input affects the memory, affects the flow output, and the flow output is a strengthened pattern. It's a translation of the auditory input into a efferent pathway in Wernicke's area that's probably related. Wernicke's area probably related to the hippocampus, which then produces the flow, the output flow into Broca's area that that must also be related to the memory system, and that creates the I haven't thought that one through, but that would create the formula for the word, the grammatical formula, and that produces the output that can go to various motor outputs, something like that.
It's interesting you brought in the hippocampus. Now I'm starting to wonder about connectivity between Wernicke's area, Broca's area, and the hippocampus, because I was
must be.
I was thinking about, like, when I was thinking about, like, so the place, in addition to taking us to the mind is music, I was trying to think of like all grammar as a kind of motor skill, but all motor skill as a kind of grammar. But then so
absolutely, it is a grammar. I mean,
I was focusing on the striatum. I was forgetting the hippocampus, and so the hippocampus, we're kind of coming back to maps and graphs. It's capable of doing like these sequence, like the hippocampus is, it's great at mapping. So now I'm wondering how much of language is involving actually like mapping, and how much of grammar and speech production and meaning making is actually involving the hippocampal system, kind of mapping things out or allowing us to traverse graphs.
Well, it has to have a map of, I mean, if it's a visual input, it's got to be involved in the it has to receive a particular pattern encoding the sensory input, and that would have to activate a matrix, an ensemble of neurons in the hippocampus that they become activated by that particular pattern, and they respond to the orientation, to the map. I mean, they're the map. They are an output of the map. They create a map output. So, and then that could go to, have to go to the motor system, to the striatum to express it. But so they must be, the hippocampus does not respond to sensory input per se. It doesn't, there are no direct sensory inputs into the hippocampus. The inputs to the hippocampus have to come from someplace. So it's probable that the auditory input goes into Wernicke's area, which Wernicke's area connects to the hippocampus. I would say that since the sequence is like that, it might be that Wernicke's area is more directly connected to the hippocampus than is Broca's area, because Broca's area the output from the combination of Wernicke's area and hippocampus may be sufficient information. In other words, the Wernicke's area may put input into the hippocampus, and the combination of Wernicke's area and hippocampus maybe giving an output to Broca's area. So Broca's area may be responsive to Wernicke and hippocampus, but not directly. It doesn't, maybe, I don't know, maybe Broca's area doesn't give a direct input into hippocampus. It may just get a response, just respond to hippocampal output.
I'm wondering if like the hippocampus and Wernicke's area might be connected to posterior, like at least in the human, the posterior part of the longitudinal axis. And that
what do you mean? What's the longitudinal axis?
So like in like humans, it kind of like goes like posterior to anterior the hippocampus. And I'm wondering if the posterior hippocampus is more closely related to Wernicke's area, and the anterior is more closely related to Broca's area. I'm wondering if like, well, I like look for
well, I don't know, because the fornix, the output from the hippocampus, the fornix carries input, carries response. I mean, the Wernicke, the fornix carries output all the way from the posterior to the anterior hippocampus. One thing, there's a question about the hippocampus. I always wonder, does a theta wave travel longitudinally through the hippocampus in time?
They just established that, I think.
It does?
Or I forget.
It's like a wave. Does a wave start in the posterior and travel to the anterior?
I believe so. So Sosnowski and Butsaki, I think, both have some recent work. I think they have some recent work.
Because that would be really, that would simplify things. That would really, I mean, it would make sense, because then that if each theta wave is systematically traversing the structure. I mean, the hippocampus is basically shaped like a banana. So if you start from the tip of the tip of the banana, and the fornix is like the stem of the banana. That's because the stem of the banana doesn't contain the fruit. The stem of the banana is just purely what?
I said, now you tell me.
The stem of the joke. Okay. The stem of the banana is just the rind of the banana peel. The stem of the banana just contains the peel.
And fornix is just the white matters that are
the banana, the fruit of the banana, the part we eat, is really the gray matter of the hippocampus, and the alveus, which is the white surrounding of the alveus, is the white matter that encapsulates the hippocampus. The alveus is like the banana peel, and the alveus covers the whole hippocampus, and then if it filters down into the stem, which becomes the fornix, because the fornix is just fibers, white matter.
And then that goes to the mammillary bodies, correct?
And it goes to the, well, yeah, it goes to the mammillary
It goes to
bodies,
many
right?
places,
But it
but
also, it goes to the septum. It goes to the septum and to the mammillary bodies primarily, and probably has distributions along the way. But yeah, the fornix is the, it goes anatomically most clearly. It goes to the mammillary bodies, but it also ends. There are fibers that end in the septum.
In terms of like
on the way.
integration, there's a sense
So-
in which we're most integrative, and now this is outputting to
Yeah,
the highest
so-
level of control.
Yeah, so it'd be really neat if there's this traveling wave of each theta wave travels from the other end of the banana into the stem, and then along the way is the spatiotemporal organization of the hippocampus, as like, if you imagine a series, if you imagine that the hippocampus is really a stack of checkers, or or a series of discs. Like if you cut a banana into discs, then that's what the hippocampus is. And each disc has its own integrative thing. And then you start that, and then each theta wave starts at the end of the banana and comes all the way around, one wave. And that would mean that you have different checkers, different chips. Each one is a chip. You're going to say it's a checker, but each checker is a computer chip. And you have a spatial sequence of those, like a stack of checkers, but it's also temporally coded, because if the theta wave starts at the end and makes its way in time to the stem, then you're activating different chips at different moments of the wave of the phase of the theta wave. I mean, if that, that could be like the simplest, if that's the simplest arrangement, it would make it very simple, because then you could have different outputs spatially determined. And then that would give the reason why you have certain functions occurring at certain phases of the theta wave, because the outputs occur at, like the fastest reaction time, or when the rat presses the lever at a particular phase of each theta wave, even though there could be many theta waves in between. But when they make the decision, when they make the output, it occurs at a particular phase. And what we found with the rats releasing the lever, they released the lever at a different phase of the theta wave than when they press the lever. So it's a different output. It was a different motor output. So different motor outputs occur at different phases of the theta wave, and that could be because you have different commands at different chips, different checkers along the way of along the length of the hippocampus. And so it's not only a spatial organization, but it's a temporal organization. It's a spatiotemporal organization. Let's say I mean, just for sake of argument, that the output to the pressing of the bar occurs near the tip of the banana, and the output to the lifting of the bar occurs near the stem of the banana. And so that's why you would have those different motor outputs occurring at a different phase of the theta, because they're being controlled from different places in the hippocampus. It could all be this beautiful. I mean, I'm sure this is way oversimplification, but if you think of that as the ideal case, at least it's a hypothesis that can be tested.
Or maybe it's not a simplification. Maybe it has a kind of elegance. So it's like you're getting this traveling wave starting from the anterior going back to the posterior hippocampus. The anterior is the tip of the banana. And so as it's moving through, and if you're looking at the segments of your
But wait,
slice,
I'm thinking the other way around, that the tip of the banana the tip of the banana, as opposed to the stem of the banana, the tip of the banana is the posterior hippocampus, and the stem of the banana is the anterior hippocampus, because that's where the fornix is going from. It's going out.
Okay, so that's different then. Okay, so
it's coming from the tip out to the stem. The theta wave starts at the tip and passes along the length of the banana out to the stem, out to the fornix.
So that would be consistent with Reddish's work, where he's showing, like, as the rodent is doing this choice behavior, you're getting these anticipatory sweeps of the place cells, where you're seeing like these trajectories play out, where one will activate sequentially to the other. And this would be for the rodent, like navigating, but for us, it could be like space in a kind of generalized sense, like just wherever we are. It's really moving from past to future, whether you're actually moving through space of a conceptual space or a physical space. But basically the segments of the banana going now posterior to anterior, where the posterior would be the tip of the banana. And then as you move anterior, you're actually moving through space-time or time-space. Right. And then you're now through the fornix, the white matter bundle is getting integrated, going up along, and then basically one of its primary outputs would be mammillary bodies and septum, but at the septum, you're at this highest level of the hypothalamic control column, like the most integrated organic act. So you're like,
right.
So, but now these are also, so you're both modulating and responding to the most central organismic need.
Right, and the mammillary bodies, there are two main projections from the mammillary bodies. Well, one main one is the mammillothalamic tract, which is tract of Vic Desir.
There's two?
What?
Well, I didn't know there's two. What's the second one?
Yeah, well, the main one is the mammillothalamic tract, and then there's also an output down the brainstem, and I think the medial forebrain, medial longitudinal tract or something. There's a major output from the mammillary bodies down the brainstem.
Is it two like neck apparatus, or is it going somewhere different? Because like one of the primary inputs I've heard from
I'm not sure where
is stretch receptor information from the neck is potentially important for as an input to the mammillary bodies. So as it
stretch receptor. Why? What is that?
So
what's the function?
I've been wondering whether with the
head position.
The head position basically helping to move things into an egocentric reference frame, where the snout is pointed.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So if you're integrating it, like basically establishing a point of view, I'm wondering if, because the mammillothalamic tract, I think it hits then like anterior lateral thalamic nucleus, cingulum. Yeah,
then it goes into the limbic system.
And so I'm wondering if
the cingulum and
part
back into the hippocampus
is where was your head via the stretch receptors, but
well, but there is a major output. I can't remember exactly the name of the fiber pathway, but it's a major output down into the brainstem, down the brainstem. It's in the brainstem, but it's down, descending. There's an upstream, there's a mammillothalamic, and then there's the descending pathway.
I'm wondering if it's basically a kind of like motoric biasing. Like, is it, for instance, actually influencing where the animal points its head? Like, is it actual helping physically orient? Or is it like what else? Like, is it like, is it helping?
It could. Part of it could be motor. Sure, it has to.
Huh.
By the way, it's after 11.
Oh, no. So, and we
Okay,
did
so
not get to, okay, so we touched on basically principles of nervous system organization across insects and vertebrates, centralized and distributed computation and what we might mean by that, meanings of meanings, and the nature of control of language, and so motor skill is grammar and grammar is motor skill, but also ways in which by the time you get to this level of meaning, this action perception cycles that are so useful start to get a little bit confused. And
confused meaning entangled.
Yeah.
In the good sense.
Oh,
Integrated.
That's, yeah, integrated. And so we did not
coordinated,
integrated, entangled, entwined, but we did not get to some of your ideas about, which I want to get to soon, about quasi-homuncular body-like control and integration process.
Oh yeah.
I want to get into your ideas on that later. We're not going to really have time for that now, but I want to go there.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of wide ranging, and also, of course, phase of movement in relation to the theta wave.
The theta wave hippocampal system, and basically taking space-time or time-space into the brain, into the organism,
and actually the fact and actually another very important principle is speed of conduction. I mean, the speed of relationship among different brain regions, because that's very important. Because if they're too far apart, it's not efficient. If it takes too long for information to get from one place to another place, that's less efficient than if the two regions doing related functions are close to each other. Then they can communicate between them much faster and more efficiently, and that is a principle of brain organization. Location, because of time. So time and distance, time and space. We're talking about time and space in the brain. It's real. It's a real factor of developing an efficient system, an efficient computational system, to have related functions close to each other in space, because by being close to each other in space, there's less intervals between the communication. The communication is faster. It's like the difference between writing a letter on paper and sending it by the mail versus email. The speed of communication can make a big difference in the efficiency of functioning.
Efficiency. Could you coordinate at all the ensembles? Like, if you can't get them to communicate within an integrated enough way quickly enough, they won't be able to coordinate and they won't be an ensemble.
That's right. So, and the way of doing that is by putting them close together. And
so now I'm wondering the extent to which basically now we do want to talk about maps, and that basically
the mapping is very important.
Self-organizing properties based on minimal the fastest flows first, or the most efficient, like the least action, most efficient flows, whether this naturally in some centralized structures induces map-like topographic properties in terms of their dynamics can reflect the world. So to what degree?
And there are maps, there are body maps at all different levels of there's body map in the spinal cord, there's body map in the nucleus gracilis and cuneatus in the medulla, there's body map in the thalamus, there's body map in the cortex, in the sensory cortex, and the body map in the motor cortex.
So next time I really want to focus on body maps in the brain.
Okay, sure. Sure. They're literal maps. I mean, it's not, in other words, if you stick an electrode in one place in the spinal cord, you get a response to a flexor muscle of the arm, If you stick it in a different place in the spinal cord, you get an extensor muscle in the leg, and it's systematically organized. There are pictures of this. There are literal pictures showing the body represented in the spinal cord, body represented in the medulla, where the nucleus and gracilis carry the sensory input from the body. There has to be, because otherwise it would be chaotic. How would you get the information from, say, a bee sting on your finger into the right place in the brain? So it has to be topographically organized. It is.
Coupled topographic multimodal body, or coupled topographic multi-scale body maps along the hierarchy.
Exactly, all along next
time let's go deep
at every relay point. At every relay point. So the spinal cord is one relay point from the sensory input. The medulla is a second relay point with the nucleus and gracilis cuneatus.
And at each point, a map.
There's a map at each point. There are pictures of it. There are literal body maps shown in pictures on paper. And then the same thing in the sensory thalamus.
How high
the
up
head is one place
go, and how do they change? Next time.
And they change, and they can be changed, like with amputation, after amputation. Yeah. And in the sensory cortex and the motor cortex. Yeah.
So
okay, to be continued.
Next week, or will it have to be 10:30?
Okay. Well, okay.
We'll figure it out.
Down. Okay, we'll figure it out. Okay, Adam. Have a good week.
You too.
You really, you have this unique ability to trigger my. I'm putting all these things together on the fly. I'm sort of thinking about them at different times, but now, you sort of focus me. It's really very, very exciting for me to do this, because I'm clarifying things for myself.
We improvise well together, I think.
Yeah, we do. We do. Okay. So take care. Have a good week.
You too.
Okay. Take care.